Hello and welcome to Rebuild. My name is Michael Belch, and as always, I am joined by my brother, Bradley Belch. Here at Rebuild, we want to understand what God's Word has to say about all areas of life, and we want to understand how we can approach those various areas in ways that are pleasing to Him. And we are very interested here in understanding kind of the pillars that uphold society and that make a culture what it is. And we investigate as many of those topics as we can and ask a lot of questions about how we as Christians can kind of put some pieces and building blocks in place that not only make for a strong society, but make for a God-honoring society. And so tonight we are very excited to be able to interview our friend Eric Bell, and we're going to be talking about the area of business and sales and production and marketing, and also just kind of generally work and employer-employee relations a little bit in there too. So we're really excited. Eric, thanks so much for taking the time to join us tonight and give us your expertise and your insight.
No, thanks so much for having me on. I really enjoyed listening to some of the other podcasts, and I think, as we as Christian men strive to lead our families, these types of things and questions are good. And I think we should be asking questions right now in the time that we're living in. And hopefully I can bring some clarity through God's Word to be able to talk through some of the business situations that we deal with in life.
Yeah. Eric, you and I have known each other a long time, actually. We were in high school small group Bible study together I think you were a junior and I was a sophomore. I only know that because that was the year I was back in the States. And then did various mission trips together, and we're even in small group Bible studies as men with families, and so we've known each other for a long time. I don't actually really think I've really ever had the chance to kind of dive into your perspective and insight though on these areas. Of course, in Bible studies and whatnot, we would talk about the various topics that came up there. But I'm for one excited to hear kind of the fruit of your career so far in business and sales. And, there's something to be said for, as someone who's kind of jumped around from various, even different types of jobs, not even in the same field. There's something to be said for what you've done and stayed in a similar field, and just kind of the experience and the wisdom that you gain along the way. So in that sense, I'm excited for kind of this dimension of conversation and understanding from you tonight. So,
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, well, there are lots of questions, Eric, and like you said, we live in a world where some things that used to be clear and just kind of given are maybe not that way anymore. And I think of the world of business, and it's a multifaceted business, or it's a multifaceted world. So could you tell us a little bit about kind of your experience in the business world, what you do, what you have done, and I guess just briefly, you could also tell us a little bit about your family and how many kids you have.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. So in regards to business, I graduated in 2003 with a business and marketing degree from George Fox University. It's just outside of Portland, Oregon. It is a Christian liberal arts university, and chose that university based on a couple of things. A, that it had a great, strong Christian background, and then B, I really enjoyed playing baseball, and they wanted me to play baseball there. So I was able to kind of do two of my loves at the same time and get a great education and play baseball. After I graduated, I had this marketing degree, and I remember my dad asking me, he goes, well, what are you going to do after college? I go, well, I got a marketing degree. I'm going to do marketing. And he kind of opened my eyes a little bit and said, well, there's not a lot of marketing jobs out there. You should try sales. And I was like, oh, okay, I think I can do that. And so graduated in 2003, pretty soon after the Twin Towers and 9/11 and all that type of thing. The job market was very soft. And so I actually delivered pizzas for Pizza Hut for about 6 months. And while I was trying to find kind of my career job, and I was able to get a job with a company called Gans USA, and they were a gift and stuffed animal company. And so I became a teddy bear salesman, and I would go around to different Hallmark shops, hospital gift shops, flower shops, places like that. Any of those tourist traps, get down to Pike Place Market in Seattle, or down on, I think it's Pier 51 in San Francisco, and anything that you would go down there. Those were the types of things that we sold, and it was really eye-opening for me to jump into a sales role with no sales background, and really I think the company did me well by just throwing me out there and just saying, hey, go do this. And so I kind of stumbled my way through the first 6-8 months as I learned what sales was all about. And I think the thing that I initially loved was the connections with people and being able to build relationships. I'm very people oriented. I love talking to people. And so I took my sales role as really as a consultant sales role. And I never desired to be the slick back hair, greasy car salesman, trick somebody into a sale. And I really think that served me well with that role, because I believe people viewed me more as kind of a business consultant and not so much a salesperson. And so I had a great success with them and kind of worked my way up from sales to regional manager to sales trainer, eventually into director of sales, and I actually managed everything Texas West and had about 80 different salespeople and regional managers that reported to me. And kind of like the 9/11, when the real estate market crashed in 2009, kind of retail went upside down, and places like Hallmark shops, the emergence of Amazon, online shopping, all these things really made that gift kind of market go towards a downturn. And so I started looking for new opportunities in 2011 and was able to get on with Stryker in 2012. And I've been at Stryker for the last 10 years. Stryker is a med device company based out of Kalamazoo, Michigan. It's really a great company to work for. They make a lot of the things that we sell in the United States, which I think is a big deal. As well as, they really have treated their employees great through the years. So Stryker's something like a $14 billion company now with 20,000 employees worldwide. So it is a very big company, and I think that will lead to a lot of good back and forth with this discussion today. But kind of had the same sales track with Stryker. Started off in sales, selling beds and stretchers and wheelchairs, kind of patient equipment, and then moved into a regional manager role again. And then now I'm working in strategic contracting. So right now our craniomaxillofacial division, tough to say, we call it CMF. So you don't have to say the whole thing, but it deals with titanium implants mostly. Wow. And so people that are having tumor resections, jaw surgeries, traumas, get in a car accident, your face hits the steering wheel, somebody punches you in a bar, you break your orbital bone. All those different types of titanium implants are what we sell, and my role specifically is negotiating the pricing for those implants. And I work with some of the larger hospital groups, the Banner Healthcares of the world, the Memorial Hermans, you probably know in Texas, there, Baylor Scott and White. Yep. Providence, Kaiser. So it's my job to work with those customers at a high level to secure, 3, 4, 5 year contracts for purchases in that space. So it's really gone from, starting almost like your son with the door-to-door sales, selling teddy bears, knocking on just about any door that was open, to now working with some of the largest corporations in the nation in healthcare.
Yep. And you married your high school sweetheart, and
I did.
Yep.
So Allison and I have been married since 2001, so just over 20 years.
Wow.
And we've got a son, Jacob, who is about to be a junior in about a month, 16 years old, and then 2 girls that are going to be in 7th and 6th grade, and they're 13 and 11. So busy household. We had quite the softball game last night. Maybe we finish off with that at the end, but there's no crying in baseball. There's a lot of crying in softball.
That's all the kind of experience that we're looking for sure, as far as somebody in the industry that we could ask questions for. So thanks for that. We do want to focus in our podcast in general on what God's word says about business. So from your background, you've been doing sales now what? if I'm doing the math right, you started in 2004, like 18 years-ish? About
Yeah,
18
pretty
years?
close. Yeah, pretty close.
What have you learned about, because early on, I'm sure it's ambition driving, just striving to do what you can to survive, learn the trade, so to speak. What kind of things have you learned about business as it pertains to the Bible? How should we treat the making and selling of goods as Christians?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And I think, all of us on here are parents as well. And I really feel like in all that we do, the Bible has to be the foundation. And I think that knowing that God's word is living and active and has the answers for all that we need for life and godliness, it's one of those things where, this podcast actually had me diving back into the word to say, hey, what do we see? What is in there? And, there's those overriding principles, right, of Christianity that, we don't compromise or we do our best to live by the Spirit in that way, to not compromise those types of things. But I would say, as it goes towards the business world, I try to take it as a Christian view and not a business view, right? And I think if we look through the lens of the Bible with all of our decisions, then that helps keep it cleaner. And I think where I have seen both, friends, Christian and non, get into trouble is when you kind of take that worldly lens and try to maybe shorten the curve to getting where you want to be or what you want out of business. I think those are the types of things where we really get in trouble. And so, I think about, stories like the rich young ruler in Luke 18, where Jesus, asks him, have you followed all the commandments? And he says, yes, I followed all the commandments. And he says, one thing you lack, go sell all that you have, give to the poor, and follow me. And that really speaks, I think, as Americans, right? Like, Michael, you've been overseas a lot. Like, we have so much. And I think we take for granted how much we have. And not holding on to the things of the world and not holding on to whether it is, the accolades of business or the profits of business or putting those things as number one in our lives, that to me is where the focus on business has to stay. Otherwise, you really get into, I think, sticky situations and more gray areas that hopefully you can avoid by looking through that biblical lens.
So,
go ahead, Bradley.
The granular of that, though, is pretty impactful. I mean, because in sales, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of sales are at least partial, if not wholly commission-based. So your actions then at that point, looking through the biblical lens, are going to directly impact the amount of money that you end up making.
Correct.
So how do we balance that desire to provide and make money not get carried away with I don't know if it's taking advantage of people, but where's the balance there in the granular? Because we are supposed to not care about the worldly things, but yet we do still have to provide.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, and I think, one of the things that I always think about is where does it come from, right? And whose is it? And if you look back in Deuteronomy 8, it talks about, remember the Lord God, he gives you the power to work and to gain wealth. And there's a bunch of verses in the Bible that talk about, gaining wealth or being wealthy or having a lot. And a lot of times those are blessings from the Lord. There's a lot of Psalms and Proverbs that talk about those things, about working hard, gaining things and honoring the Lord through working hard. And I really think it boils down to that heart and soul issue of what are you doing with that profit? What are you doing with that money? And if the goal of your heart is to look at your bank account every day and see what that number is and make that number go up and up and up, then, you get into that area where you're creating an idol for yourself in money or wealth. And it's really easy. And I'm not saying I've done that perfectly over the last 18 years, to say the least. I fight it all the time. There's even some instances just in the last couple of years with COVID where I've had some opportunities to do other things. And I've said no and said, hey, I don't think this is, right for me and my family right now. And I had to catch myself of like, if I would have taken those job opportunities, it would have only been for more money. And to me, that was A, selfish, B, sinful, and C, not what is best long term for what my life is supposed to be, right? We're supposed to be honoring to the Lord. And also, again, as dads, like, what am I showing my kids if I'm going to take a job that potentially gets more money, but then allows me to not be as home with them as much and travel more and prioritize being away from them just to gain a little bit more money? And so, yeah, I think, Bradley, I do think you have to be, honest. There are, people who work for a company know all the ways to, skirt the edges, and I know them too. And you have to not be willing to take the short-term success and potentially extra profits for, sordid gain. And I think that's where there's a lot of Christians who I think are successful and potentially very wealthy that are doing things the right way, doing things, in a way that does honor the Lord and follows, his biblical truths. And then hopefully they're using, that money and those profits to further his kingdom as well.
You mentioned the word sordid there, and I actually think that's a helpful thing to think about. And I don't know, Eric, if you can think of any examples where have you ever had, and feel free to not answer this and we can just edit it out, but have you ever had a time where you kind of mentioned it with the COVID thing, but where you've had to make a hard decision and chosen integrity in your business dealings? And if so, did people around you notice that? Like, was that obvious to people?
Yeah, I'll give you a great example. I'm going to go all the way back to the teddy bear toy selling days. So back in, it was about 2006 or 7, we had a product called Webkins. And it was the first, or one of the first, definitely the most popular, online toy. And so it was a stuffed animal that you would buy, and it came with a little piece of paper with a code on it. And you would log on to this website, plug your code in, and then there was a virtual world for you to build a pet, a house, an environment, all this kind of stuff. Well, it got on, CBS, NBC, ABC, Hot Toy for Christmas, completely blew up. It was something where people were selling millions and millions of dollars of these things. It was that popular. And there was multiple times when I was selling, in Eastern Washington, North Idaho, small hospital gift shops, Hallmark shops, places like that, where they would want to buy tons and tons of these things. And I just knew there was no way that they would be able to sell them. And it would have been easy to say, oh yeah, buy 10,000 of these, or buy 20,000 of these, or buy 50,000 of these, and put a bunch of money in my pocket, knowing that there was no chance that there was enough population in the area to buy all those things. And so I made it very clear to my customers, hey, let's start off slow. It's much easier to place a reorder or order more down the road. You can even take lists of your customers who want them and order them as needed. Like it could have been and there was a lot of people that, especially on the East Coast, that they were literally taking $1 million orders and then profiting off those, and buying lake houses and boats and all these things. And there absolutely is that inner thought process that you have to fight, right? That sinful man inside you of, oh man, I'd love to have a new car, or I'd love to have a boat, or, you know, something like that. And I think that thankfully through the Holy Spirit and through God working in my life, I was able to fight off those urges. And I will, to your point, you know, did anyone notice? I had bosses that were like, hey, you know, doesn't seem like you're selling as much as other people. Like, what's going on here? Like, don't you think you could sell more? And, you know, I had to stand up for myself and say, listen, I'm doing what I think is best for my customers. And I feel like I understand my customers very well, and the footprint of their stores, the foot traffic of their stores, the amount of people who live in this area. But when you've got bosses that are in Atlanta and New York and some of these other big cities, they look at those things and they go, wait a second, what's going on out there? So I think that's an easy example. I'll give you another example that's a little bit more recent. We had a contract that we were, probably shouldn't use names, so I won't, but we had a contract with a hospital in California, and we had been going back and forth with negotiations and pricing, and it was a long negotiation. There was a lot of terms and conditions. There's a lot of legalese that we were having to go back and forth with, which is normal for us. But when we got the signed contract back, they put the wrong price file in, and it was much more beneficial for Stryker than it was for the customer. And I went back to them and I said, listen, you know, whoever's fault this is doesn't matter, but please look at this revised version with the corrected price file and have this contract executed, because this is what we actually agreed to. And so, you know, those types of situations, A, you know, it's the right thing to do, but B, I also think that as we continue to use our platform to honor Christ, that's where we get those opportunities, right? Where that guy, he said to me, oh my gosh, thank you so much. Like, that was a huge mistake on our end. Could have cost us, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And that gives me the opportunity to be able to say, of course, like, that's the right thing to do. And one of our mission and values at Stryker is integrity. And that does give me kind of that opportunity to say, listen, we want to do what's right. We're going to do what's right. And hopefully that leads to additional conversations.
What so Stryker is not a Christian company. It's just a med sales or medical production
Correct.
company.
Correct.
So some of those conversations that you're looking for at that point are going to be they're going to have to be forced at to some degree, right? So there's, you know, if we don't actually take the step, it's kind of like sharing the gospel. You know, if we get to the point of, where we feel there's an opportunity and we walk away from that opportunity, whether it's the actual Jesus conversation, gospel conversation, or if it's just a conversation about a spiritual topic, how do we as Christians use secular companies or work within secular companies to take conversations to that next level? Is that something that is just prudence and judgment as it goes, or because there's always going to be a certain amount of risk involved and a certain amount of boldness involved. How can you encourage Christians or that are in similar positions to go, all right, so there is some license, and maybe it has to do with your reputation within the business that gives you those opportunities. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So great question. I'm really glad you asked that, actually. So Stryker they're a Fortune 500 publicly traded company. So, we are stockholder driven and do things to, create profits in a way that enhances the stockholders, share values and all that type of thing. So, it is definitely a risk to speak the gospel or talk about those types of things. And I would say the way that I do it is I feel like the people who work at Stryker typically are genuinely concerned about you and your life and what's going on. And a lot of Monday, Tuesday conversations like today are, hey, how was your weekend? What did you do? What was going on? And I try as hard as I can to start those conversations off with, oh, you know what, it was our turn to teach Sunday school this week, and we teach kindergarten through second at our church, and it's so much fun to, be with the kids. And, so I try to insert my actual life and what we do, oh, you know what, we've got small group tonight on Wednesdays, and, so I got to get off this call and get ready for that. And, oh, what's small group? What does that mean? And so I feel like it's been fairly effective in my career to use those types of things. And to be completely honest, I would say the last 3 years I've really focused on it a lot more, and I feel like God has really worked on that in me, and I haven't had as much boldness in the past, but I really do feel like I will specifically tell someone, hey, I will pray for you, if their kid is sick, or like I will try to take those types of conversations and opportunities to interject something like that to kind of get a feel for the person. And kind of one of two things happens. One, we start down a road of, oh, you know what, I used to go to church when I was a kid, and and we kind of have a conversation about, what is your spiritual background? What's, and that helps me a lot with, okay, how can I pray for this person? When I'm, I try to do my best to have a prayer list, and I have striker people on that list, and interjecting those little things like that gives me kind of a vision into their lives and them a vision into my life. And I also think that then starts becoming my reputation, Bradley, as you're talking about there. And so when people are around me, I find less swearing, less vulgarity, because they know where I stand, which is great because I don't like hearing those things. And B, it does give me the opportunity to interject the things that I believe in a way that isn't, I think, overwhelming, and has led to some really good conversations.
Well, that's good. Good practical points that we as believers in life, but also specifically in the business world, can put to practice.
And it's an interesting thing where, as an employee, you have an obligation for the time that you spend to your boss.
Right.
And it's like you say, it's a publicly traded company, and so there's even an additional duty. This is funny. It's coming up, and we'll get there in a minute, but it's coming up with some companies now who seem to be choosing ideological pathways rather than profit-driven pathways. And there's a lot of people out there who are saying, wait a minute, is that company fulfilling its obligation anymore? And so
sure.
It is, I think, a good tension for people to think about who are Christians. Like, I need to honor my boss, and I need to do that by working hard, and I need to do that by trying to present my boss or the company in a good light, sell the products, etc. And also, we're ambassadors for Christ. And I think one thing that I hear you saying is sometimes our testimony comes from our hard work and our willingness to put other people, like Eric, your example there with the toy company, you were putting the needs of your clients before your own.
Yeah.
Right. And that is a distinctly Christian and Christ-like attitude. And so sometimes what I hear you saying is our testimony comes by us living and working the way Christ would have us do, not just in, having a 15-minute gospel conversation at the end of each sales call, which would probably get you, in quite a bit of trouble pretty quickly.
I think that's a great point, and I think that would be one of my encouragements to other people in business. If you are not feeling the boldness, A, pray for it. B, you can use something like your life to be able to go down that path. I think most people do generally want to, know what you did on the weekend, or, as you build that relationship with them, if you are working hard, if you are, putting their needs first. To your point of stereotypes, that isn't always the case. And so those types of things then lead down that path to where maybe you'll have the boldness at that point, or you'll have a better relationship, right? I think a lot of times with myself, if I don't have a relationship with somebody, it's a lot harder to share the gospel with them. But as I get to know them, as I work with them over time, as there becomes that business relationship, I feel for myself, it's a lot easier to start interjecting, pieces of the gospel and things that are important to Christians in a way that is non-threatening, and I think they become more open to it, right? Like when you see the guy on the street in downtown Seattle with the John 3:16 sign, you're all going, you're all sinners. You're like, in my mind, that's not super effective. But when you actually have a relationship with somebody and they know that you care about them, then the gospel, I believe, their heart is softer to the gospel at that point.
Yeah, so Michael alluded to it with some of the ideological company ideology driven business minds of companies these days.
Yeah.
So as someone who is in leadership or to some degree, do you still lead some kind of a team?
Yeah, for sure.
You lead some kind of a team in
for
that,
sure.
or part of the leadership team.
Yep.
How do we navigate the promotion of specifically worldly ideologies within companies? And I don't know where Stryker stands. I don't need to know where Stryker stands on some of these things. But you look at company after company. If it's anything government, there's all the LGBTQ training and all the racial trainings and this, that, and the other, and more companies privately are doing the same thing. So how do you navigate standing up for truth instead of, is it okay to just pull away? I would probably argue not, but maybe some circumstances that's just remove yourself and get through it, put your head down and get through it. Or how do we navigate that specifically in the leadership aspect? Because as a day in, day out employee, it's really hard to have any kind of influence in that. But in any kind of leadership forum, I would like to think there's some say or some sway that we may have as Christians.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and I would say Stryker is, moderately progressive. I would say they try to be inclusive. I know it's a real hot button word right now, and I think that they project in their, whether it's their social media or just their internal, company memos or HR memos or things like that, they definitely want to project that inclusive model for all of the employees. And so I would say so far there hasn't been a lot of, shove it down your throat, this is what we're doing at Stryker, you need to get on board. It's really more of, hey, we have this group, and if you want to be a part of it, you can be a part of it. And we have this other group, and if you're part of that group, you can be a part of that group. And, some of the groups I think are really good. There's a Stryker Women's Network that helps promote and get more women in the workforce and into sales. There's a Stryker African American Network, again, trying to get more African Americans into the sales force at Stryker. Like, I think they have some really good work groups as well that I think are awesome. But then they do have the other LGBTQ and some of the other networks out there for those types of people. And so there isn't they're not asking us to support monetarily. They're not asking us to, march in a parade. It really is, hey, we're trying to offer something for everybody. So I haven't had to, I've thought about it, and we'll talk through it here as well. And I will give you another example in a minute. But at this point, we haven't got to kind of that crux yet of, hey, we need you to support, like, Eric, you need to speak at this, LGBTQ, banquet, and we want you to, we haven't got to that point yet. And I have thought a lot about that and how I would work through that. And I think, as we look at the New Testament, Jesus was inclusive. And I hate that, inclusivity has kind of become that word that means LGBTQ and transgender and some of these other things that are being pushed by society. When we look at Jesus, he was, with tax collectors. He was with prostitutes. He was with the people who need him. And so I do feel like I don't want to be exclusive of people in those groups. Like if I find out someone is a part of one of those networks, like I don't exclude them, I don't avoid them, I don't try to not work with them. I feel like those are all opportunities to be able to, show Christ's love to those people and hopefully get down a path of having a conversation. But I will give you a good example. So we were actually asked, this was probably 2015 or 16, but Stryker did a big promotion with the United Way. And they asked us all, they said, hey, as employees of Stryker, we would like you to contribute to the United Way, and Stryker will match donations. And as I dug into the United Way and kind of what they stood for and some of the programs that they supported, one of the big ones was abortion. And as I dug into that, I actually had a conversation with my boss, who luckily was a Christian, and I just said, what does this look like if I don't participate in this? What is it? They were doing all these different contests, right? Like this region is donating this much, and this, and whoever gets the most donations gets, something like the president of the company will come have dinner with you all. And it was a really big deal. And so we had a conversation. I just said, listen, I don't value the same values as the United Way. And while I'm sure they do a lot of good, I don't want to support, with my money, the United Way. And again, like, I'm not saying anything terrible about the United Way, but as I dug into it, I just felt like, the Lord would want me to support with my money, other more God-fearing companies. And it was something that I think was looked down on. I don't think it ever really negatively affected me. But I was the only one on the team who didn't donate. And so it definitely put, that out there as people would put up dashboards of, okay, well, this region has 12 people and they've all donated except for this one guy. And, so there are those kind of tough decisions. And I would say in the moment, it was really hard. Looking back on it, I'm really glad I did. And I do think, having a Christian boss really helped. But I think his boss and being able to stand for what I believe in, I do think he thought that was something to, gosh, what am I trying to think? You might have to edit this. I think he really was proud that I stood up for my beliefs. And I think that there is something to be said in the business world for people who have strong morals or strong beliefs and sticking to them, right or wrong. I do think people see that as a value.
It's interesting. I don't know if there's an analogy here, but we'll find out by the end of the sentence. But our family, just as a personal conviction, we've decided not to support Disney anymore. And then the other day, Ruben, or maybe it was Abigail, I'm not sure which one, said kind of with a gotcha, like, well, we still have Amazon Prime, and so I took a moment and I explained, like, if I allow you to watch a show that is actively promoting your behavior, a change in your behavior, your belief about the world, that's different than buying a product from a company that supports those things, right? So people will come to different conclusions and different lines. But for that situation, I said, I'm bringing something in that has the potential to not only affect your behavior, but also to support affecting other kids who are even younger, who don't know these things, what's right and wrong. And so I explained that, but it's a little bit general, and I didn't really prep you for this, but do you have any kind of helpful principles that you would give to people as far as, like, most people work for a non-Christian company, right? They're not just going to all quit, right?
Right.
But any helpful guiding principles to help navigate some of these questions for employees, maybe even at various levels?
I guess what it makes me think of is Peter's dream when he's visiting the Gentiles and Jesus lowers down the curtain with all the different types of meats that Jews weren't allowed to eat. And he said, Peter, eat. And he said, no, Lord, those are not allowed. And he said, well, I made them. They're good. And I think personal convictions are tough. My wife, huge pro-life supporter, as we all are in the family, and she also was a Starbucks employee for a lot of years. And with the Roe versus Wade decision just recently, Starbucks came out and said they would pay for abortions for any of their employees. And I mean, we're talking, I was directing a decent amount of pay towards Starbucks every week for coffee and lattes and all those types of things. And her personal conviction was, we're done with Starbucks, and we don't want to support a company that does not support life and being pro-life. And I guess your question is a tough one, right? Because to your point, like, do you buy Nike shoes if they're made in a sweatshop in Philippines? Do you and my son, 17 or almost 17 the other day, he actually said this. He goes, well, who the heck can we buy anything from, Dad?
Right.
And, so there is that. But I like your approach with your daughter of the impact on their actual life and their actions, right? If I buy, a box of golf balls from Amazon and Amazon supports abortion, is that great? No. But does it really affect my actions? Does it, and again, if someone says to me, hey, I'm not buying from Amazon because of that, like, I'm not going to judge them if that's their conviction. I think, there's quite a few of those hot topics in the Christian world. Maybe it's marijuana, maybe it's alcohol, maybe, there's a lot of different things where some people would say, hey, great, use it. Some people say, no, you shouldn't do that at all. And so I think it does get tricky with companies like that. I do think it's a big miss, and I would say our kids go to Northwest Christian School, plug for NWCS in Spokane or Colbert, Washington. Bring your kids, awesome school. One of the coolest things that they just did, and we have a new headmaster at the school, and he actually was a CFO of a company. He went through our school directory, and let's say there's 500 or 600 kids in the school, so maybe a couple hundred families. They went through the whole school directory and asked what families own businesses and what they do. And they created a Northwest Christian business directory to where I've got it right here on my desk, where if I need something, I can look through that directory and I need fencing. Well, we've got a family at the school that's a Christian family that does fencing. Oh, my toilet's backed up. All right, we got a plumber. And so I would encourage Christians, and I think honestly, I think the church has really dropped the ball on this as well. And maybe it's just the church I attend, but man, I think it would be great to have something like that. You've got a church of 500 or 600 people, and being able to support other believers in their business, as well as knowing that your money is going towards a company that potentially has, a God-fearing background, has integrity, all those types of things. So, am I going to judge anyone for grabbing a Starbucks? No, I'm definitely not. Is it something that I think we could do better as Christians of networking and helping each other out? I mean, I think of, what was it, Acts 2, when all the Christians were living together and selling their property and, caring for one another. I mean, those types of things are modeled for us in the Word. And I think, specifically in my life, I can do a better job. And I think as Christians, maybe we can take that and say, okay, who can I support that I know at my church? Who can I reach out to and support those local Christian businesses?
You touched on the church and the opportunities that are kind of missing there. I've seen like opportunity pages that churches support, saying, hey, here's an opportunities for
sure.
And I don't know how well some of those things work. But to that point, where I think churches at large are missing the point is steering specifically young men. I mean, we think men have such an influential role in leadership that, not that women can't start businesses, but as men, we are called to provide for our families. Do you get any sense that the call to provide for our family encourages churches and church members, churchmen, to settle for jobs instead of going out and creating and building. Do you get any sense of that? Do you have any encouragement to somebody who might say, "Gosh, I don't want to just," in Spokane, we're familiar with Spokane. You
Yep.
go into education, healthcare. Those are like the two main fields that you
Right.
go into if you want like a stable kind of secure job. But we don't encourage Christians to go start businesses, start companies. Now that's hard. That's not easy. You have to have ideas. You have to have the
Yeah.
ability to implement it. There's all kinds of financing behind it. Is that kind of what you're alluding to, or are you just saying we should just support existing businesses? How do we generate that?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I do think it's twofold. I do think there are a significant number of companies that are Christian owned and operated, and as you talk about, even medium-sized churches like the one that Bradley and I have attended, if you've got 800 to 1,200 people coming through the doors on a Sunday, just the sheer numbers say there's going to be a decent amount of companies, and even if it's to your point, Bradley, maybe it's not Christian owned and operated, but maybe a bunch of the workers go to your church and they are, like, you could still support that company because you've got a bunch of co-believers that work for them. In regards to starting businesses, I do think it's something that we should talk about more. I think I think about our nation, and I think about where we are and where we're heading, and we as Christians can't just curl up into the corners, and we have to be willing to step out and do things. But I think it would be a great start with the businesses that are already there, and then as those businesses continue to thrive or start to thrive, then maybe there could be spin-offs. Maybe there could be, 'cause to your point, the financing, business loans, LLC paperwork, lawyer fee, all those types of things that go into starting a business, getting a business license. Those things take time and money. And so if you're not just inherently wealthy, that's not an easy thing to start a business. So it's a great question. I think it's something that needs to be discussed more.
Yeah. I don't know what the biblical principles for this are, but I've always thought that there should be some kind of there's almost every church will have some sort of a care fund where it's just giving over and above the top. But we need to find a way to get some of those dollars that people have. I mean, I don't have a ton, but I would much rather give, $100 to somebody to start up a company than give it to somebody else. Give it to a business that I'm like. I'd rather spend the money in the short term, hoping that the long term game pays off.
Sure.
And I don't know what the biblical principle. It's not tithing. The tithe is specifically for the church and the needs of the church. But there's got to be a way that we can network. Not like basically like a church crowdfunding. I don't know how that would work, but
yeah. Well, I will tell you, my cousin, his name's Tim Kraus. He's actually both created and developed two different companies that are job networking apps for mega churches, basically large churches, and almost like an Indeed or a Monster.com for churches specifically. And with that kind of same principle, if there are business owners in the church, wouldn't they want Christian employees to come work for them? And it's been an overwhelming success. And he actually sold one of the apps to a larger Christian company. You'd know the name of it. It's based out of Atlanta. Crown Ministries.
Okay. Oh yeah.
And they now own that app because it's been so successful in bringing Christians together for needs. And I think, again, I'll go back to that Acts 2 situation, Bradley. You're talking about, starting businesses. I think just like that, Christian employers should be looking, within their growth groups, within their churches, within, hey, do you want to, my cousin Tim, who I just mentioned, we've talked a lot about in the last 10 years, like, hey, what can we do where we can work together and do something? And we haven't been able to come up with it just yet. But I do think that's valuable. And I do think that's a way that we can continue to impact our nation in a positive way.
Yeah, I think it's a healthy way to think about ambition. A desire for more, not just for the sake of the dollar value, but more because God has equipped us with the ability to give more, to do more. And so there's a certain ambition that I really respect about the business world specifically, that I think could translate down to just the church at large. Just an ambition, a desire to build and to support businesses that thrive. I mean, one of our questions that we haven't gotten to, and I don't know if we will get to, is about the reputation of the businessmen in society, kind of being a scoundrel, penny pinching. You have that Charles Dickens Christmas Carol mentality of the business person, just unkind. But what you see in society, the reality of it, and I think you're saying Stryker's a pretty good example of this as far as the actual genuine care and integrity that they hold, is that Christians do make better businessmen. They are better with their money, or they're careful with their money, but they also have a heart for taking care of people. So I think it's great. I think, but we need the ambition to actually go do it, right? So in that world, you just have to say, I'm taking risks, and the risks I'm going to take, I'm going to trust that God works through that risk and leads and steers, and knowing that when it doesn't pan out, I've had two businesses now, a home inspection business and a remodel business that I've moved away from. There's always something else that God has in store for you. So
I think what that boils down to for me, Bradley, is your point to, we have to be looking for it, and we have to be, and I struggle with this a lot of, what is my goal for today? Is it to, work hard and make a bunch of money, or is it to do my best for the Lord? And, the Bible says, do your work as unto the Lord. And if we can ourselves focus on the eternal and the spiritual sides of things, then I think we'll get to where you're talking about more often, right? Like I'm the worst at it. Like, it'll be my last thought of like, oh, maybe I should think of this, because I'm just trying to go down the line and get this accomplished and get this done. But if we can truly, ask God to have our vision for supporting other Christians or bringing him into more conversations as opposed to the last resort, right? Like, I feel like that's me. Like, oh my gosh, my kid's sick, last resort, pray, as opposed to, hey, let's pray about this ahead of time, be thoughtful about it ahead of time. How can I support a young man opening a business that is in our church? How can I, Lord, show me, someone at church? Let me ask, be proactive. Is there anybody, that ask your small group, ask your pastor, what are you hearing? Hopefully there's somebody who's connected, and, the Lord will lead if you ask. And I think, specifically for myself, like, I need to do a better job of asking those questions. But if we could get a mentality of asking that direction, and that takes the focus off us, right? Takes the focus off the money we have, the wealth we have, and it's more about others and loving others through the resources that God's given us. That's where I think we can really make a difference.
Yeah,
and there's such a tension, a justified tension in our Christian worldview of wanting to be suspicious of greed, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that we've gone a little too far sometimes in that we kill the rightful ambition, especially that young men have, to produce, to create, to make something. And I don't know if we want to see the business world even changed. It's going to be up to, like you say, us as Christians to be creative, to be men of integrity, women of integrity who start companies that meet actual needs. And but but I want to unlock that in a biblical way, rather than just kind of suppress it and say, be careful, don't make money or don't make too much money. So yeah.
For sure. Well, I think, as someone who is in a leadership role, I do think that we have to lead by faith, and we have to trust, to your point, Bradley, that God does have our future in his hands. And if we can trust in that and lead by faith, whether it is, the LGBTQ agenda, whether it is, gaining wealth or more money, all of those things, if we have our hands open and available to God, this is yours, not mine. And again, that's something I struggle with, right? Like, I want to hold on to it. Like, I want to be comfortable. I want to not have to worry about, the next this or that. And, I think prioritizing the way that we do invest or spend our money is very God honoring.
Yeah.
I want to end with a wild card here, Eric. Those have been really helpful.
I got another question too.
Oh,
okay.
So we might not be ending here, but go ahead.
Well, I'm gonna slightly pivot. So go ahead, Bradley.
Mine's a pivot as well. You mentioned your company Striker back a couple years, doing a drive for United Way.
Yep.
United Way.
Yep.
Dreaming big and big picture. Is it unrealistic? But let's actually scratch that. Not unrealistic. What would it take, or what would it look like for 10, 15, 20 years from now to have Stryker promoting a Christian organization of some sort? Because that's the kind of big picture. We as Christians, with the world the way it is, aren't going to be able to build Stryker in the next 10 to, the Stryker competitor in the next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah.
But we would like to see Stryker support a cause that is more directed towards, things of the gospel than United Way. So this is kind of putting you on the spot here, but how do we dream big as Christians and say, not only do I just want to, remain neutral in the business space, like that, I think that's like best case scenario for the next 2 years is how can this company just navigate being neutral, right? Like, how can we steer away from a direct over affront on the LGBT? How can we counterpunch, so to speak, and dream big enough to say we want to support this cause and we want to work towards getting Stryker to support that cause? Is that realistic? And if I don't know, how do we get there? That's the mentality that I want to be operating under. Totally.
No, and I understand where you're going with that. I think, I think it takes a world organization, maybe even like a missions organization, that in some sort of circumstance, whether it's a drought or a famine or something like that, where this Christian organization is saying, hey, we're going to fly, thousands of bottles of water and food and all this kind of thing, and then taking something like that to Stryker of like, hey, this is, a humanitarian effort by a Christian company. I think that would be the best opportunity. I don't feel like the current temperature in the room per se is going to go towards, a pro-life organization for say, or a church group. And I feel like, rightly or wrongly, and I would say wrongly, I think Stryker would go to a separation of church and state, type of thing. If, we can't support, a church orphanage or, a pro-life or, something like that. But if there was some sort of humanitarian aid or effort, I know there was some companies that Stryker supported. I don't know if they're Christian or not, but they were, PPE, masks and gloves and, all the things during the COVID, the big start in 2020, where Stryker was supporting and donating PPE to those companies for them to pass out, all over the world. So I think short term, I think that would be probably best case scenario. If you're talking 10 to 20 years, then I think it's got to be back to your point of Christians, starting businesses and organizations that can build to the size where they could have an impact. I will say Stryker has allowed us, and I actually, this is definitely not to toot my own horn, but this popped into my head. We did do, it was during COVID also, it was a push-up challenge. It was going to sound kind of funny, but it was, it started off, everybody does, 25 push-ups a day. And then the next week it goes to 50, and then 100, and then it got to the point where you have to do 250 in 10 minutes or something to that effect. If you can't do it in 10 minutes, then you're out. And I ended up winning the competition, and everybody. This was regional manager sponsored. This wasn't Stryker Corporation sponsored, but everybody put $50 in the pot. And when I won, they said, "Well, what do you want to donate it to?" Because they, we make plenty of money at Stryker. Like, they weren't going to just pad somebody's pocket. They wanted it to be, for something. And so I said, donate it to our church. Uh-huh. And they did. They donated to Faith Bible Church. It was like $400. It wasn't a ton of money, but I mean that's a little example that I hope could build into. And again, it offered me a lot of conversations with the people that I was competing against. Doing something stupid like push-ups, to be able to talk about my church and what I love about it and why I want to support it and why that a lot of people had things like the United Way or other things that were going to be their donations for that same money, and it was just a great opportunity. So maybe, Bradley, we can start small with things like that, and then maybe transition them into bigger organizations down the road.
Yeah. It's not for lack of organizations, right? I mean,
no, I agree.
Union Gospel Mission is a
Totally.
Christian organization nationwide. So there's plenty of causes that companies could support. And I take your point on the separation of church and business. Fine, except in our most recent podcast that Michael, have we released it yet? I don't know if we have. The one we just had, the follow up with Stephen Wolf.
Oh, it came out today.
That came out today. It's what we talked about is the fact that we can say that all we want, but we're no longer in the political realm. It's no longer just a left versus right. Like the progressive mentality is a spiritual religion. It's a pagan religion, and they will never call it religion. So Stryker can pretend that it's not supporting a religious activity, or a religious belief system. Yeah. But they are. But I mean, and the further we go down this road, they are supporting that. And so as Christians, we should really. I don't know the answers here, but we should at least be thinking about how we can start gaining that ground back, saying, look, this is the reality, is you're going to support a moral cause one way or another, a religious cause one way or another. We would like to find ways to make that, if any, at bare minimum, an option, for us to support, if not just the overt direction of a company to support that. Yeah. But it is a long game. It is a 10 to 20 to 30 year long game for sure. Yeah. But it's gonna take us as believers, with discernment and with wisdom, being a little bit crafty and a little bit bold, and putting ourselves out there a little bit.
Yeah, and let me encourage anyone who might listen to this podcast. Like, I firmly believe we need to be praying for Christian leaders to be in place in larger companies in America, and senators and congressmen and women and presidents, and we need to be faithful as Christians, be praying that leaders would get into power. Again, we see in the Bible, the Lord puts people in power and takes them out of power, and so we need to be praying that whether it's something as big as Amazon or something as small as Union Gospel Mission, that the people who are leading those organizations are faithful to the truth. And I mean, this is kind of a little bit of a sidetrack, but let's go back to the start. George Fox University. I'm still so proud of them for the focus that they have on Christ as a Christian university, where a bunch of other of my friends who went to similar Christian universities have really gotten into wokeness. And again, like, we need to be praying for the universities, for the businesses, that leaders would be faithful to the word and faithful to Christ in their decisions, because so many of them are Christian in name only now, and not honoring what is biblical.
Yeah, two parts there. One, what I'm hearing you say, and I would project onto it, is we need Christians to be ambitious enough to take those roles.
Agreed.
Right?
Yep.
Just set their sights high and go for it. And two, and this is something I'll commend you on, we can't lose sight of the big picture in the short-term tensions. So we're going to need Christians to stick it out in companies that are uncomfortable. You know, I have this huge dilemma right now with the military of, well, I don't want, believers in that position of uncomfortable, like, okay, well, what am I fighting for? I'm fighting for a nation that's flying the LGBTQ flag over their embassies. But we are going to need Christians to stick it out in those positions. So my encouragement would be, to Christians in the business world to one, set your sights high and be ambitious and go get it, but then also persevere through it. And that's going to look different for everyone, right? Like, everyone's work situation is going to be a little bit different, but they're going to need to navigate some water as best they can. And I'm not saying, repress yourself, like you were saying earlier, Eric. We can't fall to the corners, but you are going to have that integrity to move forward.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
I would say we need to make decisions based in faith. So the one person who leaves a job at a company that's going woke and the one person who stays, both of those need to make their decision based on what they believe the Lord's leading and call is. And then we probably as Christians need to be willing to extend grace, like Eric, you were saying, the conviction of Starbucks. And it would be not helpful if you passed out flyers at church saying, if you shop at Starbucks this week, you need to repent. So people are going to make. Bradley and I recently made a decision. We've made a board game, and we actually had it accepted for publication. But the company was very progressive, and they intentionally draw androgynous characters and try and blur the lines between gender in all their depictions of their games. And we decided to remove the game from consideration. We just thought that was our personal conviction. But
sure,
I don't know. We could have gone the other way too. So,
sure, yep.
I still don't know if it was the right decision.
I think grace has to reign. Like, we need to, and that's not to say we can't challenge believers. That's not to say, we can't sit with them in a gracious manner and say, hey, walk me through this decision, or, maybe we think you're making a poor decision, but we'd like to hear your side of it, as opposed to, like you said, repent of going to Starbucks. I think that graciousness, and, there's actually been a situation in my life recently that I'm not going to speak too directly on, just because of the audience who may listen to this, but where I had to sit down with a very, very close friend of mine and say, hey, this is not right, and this is not godly, and this is not God-fearing. And so I'm not saying we're not to do that with believers, but I do think having grace first and foremost, and coming to them with a gracious heart of, explain this to me, as opposed to immediately throwing darts at them and saying, hey, repent, repent, repent.
No, that's really good. Always with the heart of, I think what you're getting at there with grace is a heart of understanding, trying to get to the point of understanding where they're coming from first, which involves a lot of questions. I think questions are a really powerful thing. We jump to conclusions way too easily, and that's where we lose. That's where, for me, my grace ends, is when I start going, oh, well, they did this because of that, or they don't understand this. But what you're getting at is sitting down and having that conversation.
Well, and I think the older I get too, the more I look back on what I didn't know at a younger age, and maybe projecting that onto the people that I'm discussing with and saying, hey, maybe they haven't been down this road yet. And then finally looking back, at my own sins and thinking, well, I'm not any better. I've been down, same paths or worse. and God has the grace to forgive me. And so to have that gracious heart as we approach those people, I think is very important.
Good. Well, this has been a good discussion. We didn't really save much time for sports. Do you think college athletes, having been a college athlete, should they be paid? I mean, this kind of goes into livelihood. So do you have any quick thoughts on that?
So here's what I would say about that. I think that the construction of the NCAA and the business that it has become, if you look back on, let's go back 100 years, the NCAA was created to allow intercollegiate sports to happen. Hey, you go to Army and I go to Navy and we both play football. Like, let's play against each other. Like, that was the beginning of the NCAA, is trying to coordinate intercollegiate events. And what the NCAA has become is one of the most profitable companies in the world. And so I think the way that it's structured and the viability, I just always thought it was dumb myself if, so I played college baseball. If I would have gone to a business in Little Newburgh, Oregon, and they gave me a pizza, I could have been unable to play college athletics for the rest of my career for taking a $8 pizza or a $10 pizza or whatever, while the NCAA is making hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars on broadcast rights, television, advertising, running their events like the Final Four and the college football, championship and the revenue that they make from that. So I don't think it's wrong for athletes to be able to be paid. I do think that the NCAA has probably done a bad job of setting guardrails and boundaries around those payments. Is it great that all the linemen at whatever Texas University of Texas, they all get $10,000 a month for a gym membership so that they can be on a commercial for Joe's Gym? Like, I don't know, like. I just think there probably needs to be some better guardrails around it. But I'm not against those athletes being paid. And even you go back to, it wasn't Ray Allen, who was the NBA player, went to University of North Carolina. He sued the NCAA because they used literally his likeness in NCAA basketball for PlayStation for 15 years or whatever. Like, specifically those types of athletes that are being depicted in a sporting game, like, they should be compensated for using their likeness and their so I think those things are okay. I mean, same with let's go back to my call. If I were to sign 10 baseballs and give them to somebody to sell and then take money for doing that, like, again, like, I would have not been able to play college baseball. It's my name, I'm signing it, like, it's up to me. There's restrictions on the types of jobs I could have as a collegiate baseball player and still be active. So I think it's going the right way. I just hope that there are maybe some better guardrails, and I don't know that the NCAA is capable of that.
Cool.
Yeah, it's very quickly going to be. Well, I think it already is. Isn't there a whole story right now about the USC wide receiver being poached by, or USC is poaching a wide receiver from Miami or Florida or something like that. Yeah. By paying him, I mean, it's like $1 million name and image contract.
Right.
And there's already talk. Nick Saban's already like, yeah, it's just going to be the way it is. Like, we're going to pay these guys $1 million, and our team's going to be the best.
Well, and there was another kid that was a high school senior, and he took something like $1 million as well. And the plan was and I don't remember where it was, but the plan where he was going to go to an SEC school, and then he had got the money, and 6 months later he decided he wanted to go to a different school. Like, what are the repercussions of that? I don't know that that's even played out, the repercussions. Right. But yeah, there's a lot of gray area going on with that name, image, likeness for sure. And honestly, in my mind, for that situation, I mean, buyer beware. You're dealing with a 16, 17, 18-year-old kid. Yeah. If you give him $1 million and think he's not going to potentially change his mind or not have something in the contract to get that money back, then shame on you. I mean, my kids will eat one thing one night and won't eat it again for a year.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, I think, I'm repping the Gonzaga Bulldog shirt here. You
Yeah.
know, it was great. It was great seeing Drew Timmy on commercials.
That's
That
right.
was great.
That's right.
There was probably more shadiness going on there behind the scenes, but he was doing commercials, and I'm sure he was getting compensated for it. And I think that was great.
Yeah, for sure. I guess as a nation who is built on, we don't have time to debate what it is now, but built on independence, allowing someone the right to make a living the way they see fit, I think it's kind of hard to say, hey, Drew Timmy, you can't do a Walker's Furniture commercial, or you can't do if they're willing to pay you money like that. That's where, again, I think there could be some better guardrails, but I have a tough time actually, even, and this is down another path, but I have a tough time with the NCAA, not allowing a baseball player to go into the draft if he enrolls in college for 3 years, or the NFL, you have to go a couple of years, I think 2 or 3 years, to go to college to play in the NFL, at least 1 year in college to go to the NBA, like restricting of, if there's an unbelievable violinist at 12 and can be in a concert hall in Nashville, Tennessee, making hundreds of thousands of dollars, they go do it. If there is a genius kid who can go to college at 14 and get a master's degree by 16, like, they can do it. Like, that's where I get kind of worked up a little bit, in that don't restrict someone if they're, that's the whole independence and free market, right? Like, the market's going to tell you if you're, and this happened before the NBA, had the one and done rule. You'd have six or eight guys a year who would get drafted out of high school, and 1 or 2 of them would be good, and the other 4 would get cut after a year or 2. And, that to me, I think, is a better scenario. Allow them to do it. If they're ready, they're ready, Yeah.
Well, there's a lot there, and we're already past the time that we promised you. So thanks for that wild card question. Really interesting to hear your perspective on that. So I guess to wrap up, Eric, thanks so much for your time. Really, really appreciate your thoughts, and it certainly sparked some ideas. And just Bradley and I come away from each one of these interviews just thinking, man, like there's so much more to this world and to the way God has put us together than we even knew an hour ago. So appreciate the insight that you have, what you've shared with us today.
For sure. Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
For the rest of you, as Bradley did mention about the follow-up episode that just dropped today, which won't be today when you're listening to it, but we will do a follow-up episode to our interview with Eric, where we just kind of tease out some implications and behind his back point out how he's wrong about everything that he said. And just kidding. We'll follow up and just kind of talk about what encouraged us and what we think we could maybe apply to life in practical ways. So be looking for that in the near future. And thanks so much for tuning in. We'll catch you all next time.